Today, we pull back the curtain on an agency that sounds like something out of a cyberpunk thriller, but it's been shaping our world in quiet, profound ways for the last 6 decades. What if I told you that some of the most groundbreaking, world-changing inventions of the last century didn't come from Silicon Valley, but from a secretive branch of the U.S. Department of Defense? The internet, GPS, stealth technology, all of them trace their roots back to a single source. Today, we open the vault on DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Founded in the chaos of the Cold War, after Sputnik shook America's confidence, DARPA wasn't just created to catch up. It was designed to leap ahead, to imagine technologies the enemy couldn't even dream of. Since then, DARPA has operated at the blurry edge where science fiction meets classified reality. Autonomous weapons, brain-machine interfaces, artificial intelligence that predicts your next move. This isn't tomorrow's tech. This is what DARPA is testing right now. But here's the real question. Who decides what the future looks like? And who gets to control it? Because when the government hires geniuses to imagine the unimaginable, we all end up living in its wake. Strap in. This isn't just a story about machines and minds. It's about power, secrecy, and the thin line between innovation and surveillance.
Welcome to the Retrospect podcast, a show where people come together from different walks of life and discuss a topic from their generation's perspective. My name is Ian, and as always, I'm joined by Stoney.
Hello.
And Jason.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going?
Oh, we're good. Man, I'll tell you what, driving out here today the weather was just crazy.
I've never heard a lightning crack like that before. It cracked and boomed.
I was telling Jason it lightninged for like 15 minutes straight.
It's crazy.
It was like one big thunder for 15 minutes. I was like, what the heck?
Just rumbling.
I always cringe when it's lightning that much about all my electronics in my house.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like, is this going to be the one bolt that just takes everything out?
It ends it all.
No, I'm sorry I missed last week. I'm just going through a lot, and there's a whole bunch of stuff with Workman's Comp happening. The Magnus show is continuing, and I've been going through a lot of stuff, and I'm wondering if maybe an episode we can do in the future is just missed opportunities.
Okay.
Maybe we can think about that, because I was thinking, there's a lot of missed opportunities out there, like Aldi. Why doesn't Aldi have its own nut brand? Mm-hmm. And it would be called Aldi's Nuts.
Stop. Stop.
But seriously.
Stoney's always got a good one in there.
Seriously about the missed opportunity thing. I just thought that would kind of open up the show with a little humor there. But,
I love that.
Missed opportunities I think might be a good show.
Yeah.
Maybe we could consider that and add that to the whiteboard.
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
Huge, big
I
whiteboard
think that would be an interesting topic to talk about.
Yeah.
Aldi's Nuts.
Aldi's Nuts.
I don't know about that. That's funny. Oh, man.
I got to try.
Of course.
It's hard catching you guys off guard.
This is what we miss not having Stoney here.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying.
We talked about this last week.
Yeah. There's a missing charm to the show when he's not around.
I don't know about charm would be the word. The smell might be something.
Hey, whoa, wait.
I don't know about charm.
But today we're talking about DARPA, which is an interesting, again, to kind of continue in this kind of theme.
Yeah, I think this kind of culminates everything we've kind of talked about for the last few episodes. I know everybody out there may be kind of tired of these topics, but this was probably the last one that I can think of that really kind of encapsulates everything that, all the things we've been talking about. So hopefully it'll be a good episode. Hopefully you'll find some interesting tidbits in it, and you can do your own research and see exactly what's going on there.
Well, it was founded in 1958 with Sputnik, like Jason said in the intro. It scared the Americans big time to think that the Russians had made it to space before them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of, if you notice, one of the themes of all of this stuff, paperclip, Nantucket, or everything we've done. Right. What was it?
We did the Gateway experience recently.
But there was another one.
MK Ultra.
Yes.
Stargate.
Yes. And
the one that we made up?
Yes.
Canned yams.
Candied yams.
Candied yams. And but what's the common denominator to all of them? Fear.
All right.
They are all born out of fear. And that's something I kind of noticed researching this DARPA thing. It's all about fear.
Right.
Either being afraid or wanting to cause someone else to be afraid.
Right.
And that's what's pushing the world right now. If we look about what's happening just in America today, it's all about fear.
Right.
The media, fear. The government, fear. All these little groups running around rioting and causing chaos, fear. It's all about pushing the fear agenda.
Right.
I wonder if that's not the whole agenda for all of this.
Well,
It's just pure fear.
Well, I mean, look, the reality is the world is a mean, cruel place, and they got people out there that want to destroy you.
To take advantage of that.
So you may say it's fear, and I agree. It's at its heart, it's fear, but it's fear. Everybody is fearful of something.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese are fearful of America, of doing something to them. The Russians are fearful that the Americans or the Chinese are going to do something to them. And it's just vice versa. The Americans are scared that the Russians or the Chinese are going to do something to them, or some other, Iran or whatever country is out there that wishes us harm. So, I think, we have to look at the time in which this was birthed. You're coming out of World War II. The communists are on the march. They're taking
the Cold War.
They're
fear.
Oh yeah.
They're taking
all
over,
about fear.
They're taking over everything.
Yep.
And so America, it's like we're not gonna, Sputnik. People, like, what is Sputnik? Russians put a little 23-inch diameter sphere up in space. We would look at that today and go, "What's the big deal?"
Mm-hmm.
Who cares?
Right.
The problem is they use an ICBM to put it up there. So now, the problem is, the Americans are going, well, if they can put that up, they can put a nuclear warhead on that thing, and they can drop that thing on Washington D.C. We got to do something about it.
Right.
So it's always going to be this,
right?
This tit for tat, and from what I picked up in this stuff, it appears DARPA was created because it had to, in essence, with us creating the atomic bomb, we created our own obsolescence into the thing.
Right.
So because we knew once we created the bomb, other people were going to eventually learn about the bomb.
Yeah.
And guess what? Now we need to do something to overcome the bomb.
To protect ourselves from
the
the bomb.
Germans,
So
the Nazis were 3 months away from their own nuclear warhead or atomic warhead. And they actually sent all of their stuff on a submarine to Japan. When they realized that they were done, they put all of their stuff on a submarine that supposedly, luckily, was sunk on the way to Japan. But they put everything they had on that submarine, including some scientists, all their paperwork, and some of the research and items that they had on that submarine. And they were close.
Yeah.
If they didn't have it. We talked about the Bell that they were
Of
working
course.
on too. And it's funny, that's why organizations like DARPA and all this other stuff, that's what their agenda is to get ahead of the next group. And if you can use the brain, figure out what they're trying to do and get ahead of them.
There's like interesting parts of DARPA that I didn't realize that. I knew that they've started off like the beginnings of what the internet is and stealth technology and stuff, but I didn't realize they also originally did like GPS stuff.
Yeah.
They originally had like a DARPA led like project to like make GPS a thing, and then of course it became like a.
What else did they start, Ian?
The one thing I know that I want to talk about, but I want to say is like my favorite plane favorite jet is the F-117 Nighthawk, and the fact that they were like a part of making that. Like I didn't realize. I knew they were part of like the stealth technology and stealth warfare stuff.
But think about something else we've talked about that possibly started in the mid 60s that DARPA was very instrumental in also.
The stuff that I have written down is that they also, I think, had stuff with self-driving cars and neural engineering, which is interesting. Well, AI as well. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's your favorite subject right there.
It's my favorite subject to hate.
That's why I brought it up. That's why I brought it up. Fear. See, fear again.
How do I fear?
They got into this idea of using some of this tech to potentially heal brain damaged soldiers.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, it's couched in a noble cause, but really what they want to do is map the human brain.
Right.
Completely. So there's fear in that because of what they want to do is to be able to make machines be able to think like a human.
Of course.
And that's the ultimate goal. Now, some would say they've accomplished that. You know, everything I've looked at regarding some of these projects they've done. Of course, all this stuff is already known.
Right.
It's everything everybody's reporting on is declassified documents. So you don't really know what they're working on now because they're about 25 years ahead of.
Well, I like what you're going there because I found 3 things that are very unique to DARPA. Their philosophy: high risk, high reward. 85% of their projects fail and 15 succeed. Okay. They also, when you go to work for them, you're a temporary short-term employee. All of their project managers are in and out after a few years to keep ideas fresh. Think about that. You're going to start knowing.
I'm just here for a brief
little
time.
while.
Just for a season.
And there's no internal labs. DARPA contracts out to universities, private companies, and other institutions.
Oh, well, they have.
So somebody knows what they're doing.
They have their own budget.
They have their own.
I think.
Oh, of course.
I got some budget information.
Yeah, I'll be very.
I got some budget stuff too.
I've heard some numbers, and you wonder why the Pentagon can't pass an audit.
Well,
you know, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Look, I'm not one of these people that I think DARPA is a necessary evil.
Right.
I think ultimately it's kind of one of these agencies that I want America on top.
Right.
I do.
Right.
I don't want us to be second fiddle. And if that means it's potential abuse that could happen, you got to live with that.
You got to think about DARPA is structured to disrupt bureaucracy, not build it.
Okay.
Think about that. The 3 things I just said, they are here to disrupt bureaucracy. They aren't here to help build it. They're not here to help, they want to completely disrupt it.
Right.
Their whole goal is to mess up the bureaucracy so we can't know what they're doing.
Right.
That's the whole point.
Well, it's all about secrecy because the second everyone knows about it is, the secret's out at that point.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff. I mean, it's some of these things. Like I had no idea they actually created the internet. I really didn't know that.
I've heard about that before.
I think it was called like ARPANET.
ARPANET.
Yeah,
ARPANET.
Yep.
So,
ARPANET.
just like I learned that Tor, I believe it was created by the CIA.
Yeah.
So, I get all that, but I mean,
They also did memes technology, which is what's used in cell phones today. The super micro electrical mechanical systems that are used in cell phones, that came from DARPA.
Interesting.
There's a lot of things I tell people when I was talking to some friends of mine about what we're going to be talking about on this episode, and some family, they're like, "What is DARPA?" And I'm like, "You'd be
really?
Oh yeah.
Who hadn't heard of DARPA?"
I said, "Well, I mean, believe it or not, it's like I said, you'd be surprised that a lot of things we take for granted that we have today.
Oh yeah.
It's because of them."
Well, technically, it's because of Tesla, and they just kind of stole a lot of his stuff and a lot of his ideas and are putting it out there.
Oh, I'm sure they definitely. I mean, those documents that were taken from his room have never been declassified. So at least not that I'm aware of.
Well, one of the things that I found very interesting, and we've talked a lot about in these last couple of episodes about a division or a program gets completely shut down. Oh, it doesn't work. And so, and then we just call it something else and dump a bunch of money into it.
Right.
One of their things that they came up with is called Life Log.
Okay.
Have you heard of this?
No, I'm curious.
This is a personal data tracker that was canceled early in 2004 because it was capabilities of modern social media and surveillance tech. And it was supposedly shut down.
Oh, right.
Was it shut down because it didn't work?
No.
Or was it shut down because it worked and they called it something else?
I think it was the second one. That's how a lot of these things happen.
Yeah, they just I mean, I think a lot of these projects that we've talked about in the past, they've moved it to another box.
I don't know if I told this story before the accident. Remember, I got the new eyeballs.
Yep.
And I jokingly asked the surgeon.
I remember. We talked about that. Yeah,
I did.
Yeah.
Because hey, I'm a trained sniper.
Right.
If I'm spending this amount of money to be able to shoot, 1,000 to 1,200 yards, how much would it cost me to be able to shoot 2,500 yards?
Yeah.
And he kind of jokingly said, called me an idiot, and, laughed about it. And he says, but if you wait 10 to 15 years, that technology will be out there. And I looked at him and smirked, and I said, I'm the co-host of a podcast that deals with some conspiracy theories. And if I can get it in 10 to 15 years, that means some MFer's walking around with it right now. And he just kind of rolled his eyes like this and went, I don't know what you're talking about.
All right.
And walked out the room. So DARPA is actually, the work that they're doing is 10 to 20 years ahead of what we get.
Correct.
Remember, a lot of the stuff, cell phones, drones, the smart glasses, all of this stuff comes from their technologies.
I believe that GPS, I mean, it wasn't until I think the Europeans wanted to make this available to the public into the commercial market that eventually basically the military,
But China had also stolen it.
Yeah.
And they were afraid, and they had to kind of kibosh that and start doing something to keep GPS Americanized and our allies. So they had to bring in some other groups into this to control the GPS, because they were afraid that if a lot of our stuff was using GPS, that the Chinese and the Russians would be able to disrupt that.
Yeah. Now everybody's got GPS.
Now everybody's got it.
I mean, it's on every wearable tech.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't even imagine driving a car now without GPS. I mean,
who remembers the big folder that you had with all the maps?
I remember it quite well.
You turned this page, and this page was on the top and below it, and on this side. What was it called?
The Road Atlas.
Yeah, but it was something else.
Yeah, I know.
Crap, it was in a red binder.
It was in a binder. I know the one you're talking about. I can't think of it.
And can you imagine having to do that today? Who could, what's the thing? We could cripple a whole generation by writing in cursive, driving in stick, and kiboshing GPS. Because these kids today could not use a map and a compass for anything.
I remember when my previous job, when I first started, that's how it was done. They gave you a map, find, this is over here. You need to make your way over there. And I had no clue, so I had to pull out a map and try to trace my way up there, and that's how I learned. I mean...
Well, think about Amazon. Amazon, they load the trucks, and then the computer tells the driver where to go.
Exactly.
Can you imagine them having to flick through the map
well,
and going, where's next?
I mean, our current... commercial model of how we do business now couldn't work with a road map.
No.
I mean, we're doing things the way we do because tech has enabled us to be able to do that kind of. Did y'all hear anything about the Jason scientist? And doing research on this, this is who DARPA first. These are the people that made up kind of DARPA. In the very beginning, when Kennedy wanted to made his announcement, wanted this is schools and trying to get people in the sciences and the maths and those
Right.
kind of things. But the Jason scientists, from what I was able to pick up, if you really follow kind of conspiracy theories and stuff like that, people
Right.
would be
Who,
familiar.
us?
Yeah, no. Huh?
Us? Really?
The Jason scientists were kind of up there like what we would consider the Illuminati type people.
I thought that this was your soft disclosure that you were part of DARPA. You were
Yeah.
but I was like, so-
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
it could
no.
be a CIA plant, you know?
right.
Well, you have to wonder about conspiracy theories.
Of course.
What happened the day that LifeLog was stopped?
I don't know.
What happened?
Facebook started,
Really?
and they believe they're connected. Because remember, all of this stuff in Facebook is about social media.
Right.
What were all these questions? And, oh, yeah, post a picture of you 30 years ago, 15 years ago, and today, so that you can have all your facial stuff and all the facial recognition. And then what's your favorite color? What's your favorite this? What street did you live on? Blah, blah, blah. Now they're trying to find out all your questions for your, your internet's,
Profile or whatever.
profile questions. But, hey, when you lose your password and you need it, what was the first street you lived on? What was your pet's first name? Oh, yeah, here's your new password. So we're basically giving Facebook all of our information.
No, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
But LifeLog stopped the day Facebook started.
Well, if you remember, if you
No
remember
conspiracy there.
remember the precursor, it was MySpace.
Oh, yeah.
And then Facebook, and then basically everybody went to Facebook.
Of course.
You know?
MySpace died.
Yeah, I
literally died.
I had MySpace for
Same.
a while,
Same.
and yeah,
It was a different time. It was a different time.
Oh,
on the internet.
believe me, there's no doubt that all of these things were probably backed by the CIA as a way of
absolutely.
collecting information. And I think doing these research on some of these topics, I think the CIA made a pivot
Right.
at some point after the end of the Cold War, and with terrorism and what happened after 9/11, it shifted, and their focus, I hate to say it, shifted on the interior. I think its original mission of being kind of really an arm of the Department of State.
Yeah.
It's now it's changed, and the terrorists are right here in our hometown, and so
Well, I don't think it's just terrorists. I think it's about control of us too,
right.
them and us. When you look at just the stuff that they're investing in,
Oh, yeah.
think about what their main budget. And we'll get into some of the budget stuff. AI, that's got nothing to do with our enemies. That's got all of us. Biotech, nanotechnology, quantum computing is one of their biggest budget expenditures, and cyber defense. Really?
Well, look, I'm telling you, these Jason scientists right now, there's a bit of a struggle from what I could tell. And I think what's happened, these original Jason scientists who were primarily physicists that worked in academia.
Right.
And what they used to do was, they would teach, during the, in the spring and the fall, and in the summer they would all gather and they would try to solve these national security problems. That's who kind of advised the Pentagon and DARPA, and kind of it being an arm of that, of how do we deal with some of these issues. But those have been kind of phased out. Now you've got, I think it's called a defense, some sort of national defense board.
Okay.
Guess who's it made up of? It's made up of defense contractors.
Okay.
So you don't think they have a
That would
Vested
be called
interest?
the military industrial
there it is.
complex.
We
Wow.
talk about Dwight Eisenhower warned. He feared this closed loop of basically people who make the weapons are also now advising the Pentagon of what we should do. So of course it's always
And
going
how
to
to
be
spend the money.
and well, I mean it's we've said it before. There's a lot of money to be made in war.
Yeah.
A lot of missiles and bullets and guns and tanks and airplanes. That's big budget stuff. So yeah. So that's the fear. And I unfortunately, I think what's happened is now instead of where you have kind of these scientists as before that, in essence, were out in the field and were just kind of normal Joe Blow, so to speak.
Right.
Brilliant people. And then kind of got together in their off time during a break and said, okay, how do we brainstorm this problem? And then they try
It's
to
a think tank,
right,
bringing
and they
people
try to
together
think.
for a think tank.
Now it's the big fight now is autonomous drones.
Of course.
Killer. I hate to say it. We mentioned about mapping the human brain and AI and getting machines to think and all these things. That's going on now. As a matter of fact, there's a big fight in the Pentagon regarding that kind of stuff because there are some generals that are very wary of basically equipping drones to be autonomous.
Oh, yeah.
And what that can mean. Hey, give it some instructions, go go assassinate whatever.
Right.
And you walk away from that.
Skynet.
Well,
scary stuff.
Matter of fact, I was watching this podcast regarding this investigative journalist who reports a lot on DARPA and a few of these other type of subjects. But believe it or not, there have been a couple directors that were actually at some of these meetings. Believe it or not, James Cameron.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And another person you're gonna go like, wow. Who I was fascinated was Chris Carter and the X-Files.
A lot of times they get it so close, they are asked and questioned about how did you know that? How did you know that? Mm-hmm. They get pulled into these and they get...
They were actually had some connections, these guys. Matter of fact, the smoking man. Remember the guy in the X-Files, the smoking guy? Mm-hmm. That was based off a real DARPA type of guy. And so it's like this all-knowing, entity that it's kind of like we know what's really going on and you don't. And you probably really don't want to know what's really going on. It's kind of like my favorite episode at the end of the very first episode of the X-Files.
Right.
And Mulder is meeting with Cigarette Man, or I think it was Cigarette Man, and we're talking about aliens and stuff like that. And he says, "Well, they've been here a long, long time." It kind of left you hanging, and that just kind of set the tone for the rest of the series.
That's cool.
So it was pretty fascinating that even the directors, where they got their ideas to make these movies.
Right.
So to me, the idea if James Cameron made the Terminator, I guarantee you he got the idea from some of the stuff that DARPA is working on, and I know that would be quite fascinating. That there, believe it or not, there probably is in some corner of some laboratory something called Skynet. I mean, it is, and I think we're close to it with
it's AI.
With AI,
that's what it is. It's AI is Skynet. If you look at it, if you watch the movie, and what was the movie War Games?
Oh yeah,
that was another one. Yeah,
that was AI.
That was based off of
100% taking the human control out of it and turning it over to an artificial intelligence. And letting it run it because it was for our safety. It's faster.
Oh yeah,
it can make faster and quicker decisions. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
let's
play a game.
Have you guys heard of their annual DARPA hard slogan for projects, like and stuff like that?
No, I'm.
Basically,
we talk about it because I may have heard about it.
It's basically a slogan and a benchmark that apparently. Is part of like their culture of like pushing limits of what's possible. It says that like if a project isn't daunting, risky, or potentially transformative, it probably is not DARPA hard, quote unquote. It's like that's like what the slogan means, or whatever. But it's what it's supposedly meant to do is like be exceptionally challenging. Like it wants to be transformative, not incremental, and it needs to be like high risk, high reward kind of stuff is what I was reading up on. I thought this was really interesting because it like one of the goals might be create a computer, like you just said, create a computer that can reason and explain like a human in a combat scenario. It goes beyond like just improving AI performance and all that kind of stuff. and it involves like deep scientific stuff and like solving problems that like really push the envelope. So they'll have like this benchmark that they'll put up there, and they'll have people try and.
Well, I found the name of that board now. That is, it's called the Defense Science Board. So this is the new board that is really taking kind of hold of DARPA, and so that is kind of who's really kind of driving the, kind of the direction of innovation with DARPA. And I will tell you, DARPA is probably the best run government agency in the United States, but it's the least reported on. It just,
of course,
it is. It's very secretive.
I think by the nature of the
love
work,
how you say that, but earlier when you see it's against bureaucracy. I mean, it's, that's the whole thing. So I mean, that's kind of a dualist kind of point of view there, but it's interesting. So
this is I'm telling you, though, this is a big situation right now that's going on. There's a big fight between the Jason scientists and these new people that make up this board now that are, the Jason scientists are against any sort of trying to merge human thinking into machines and autonomous drones and kind of the danger of where that can go. And as you well know, I mean, tech is getting smaller and smaller. I mean, it's just amazing, just the computing power of our phone compared to what was ran our satellites, back in the early days. So it's incredible of what can happen. They were involved in the, I hate to say it, they were involved with the COVID stuff as far as, not in necessarily a bad way, but they were heavily involved in getting vaccines down to, available to the public within a certain time frame versus the traditional time frame it was, because I think from what I was reading here was the average time, like the old vaccines, the average time between research was about 9 to 10 months. They wanted to get it down to 1 to 30 days.
Well, what they do is they're going to tell you that they helped accelerate the COVID-19 vaccines.
Right.
Well, the problem with that is because they were working on it for 6 years already.
Right.
So they knew what was coming. So I don't really think they were a big help. I think that they're doing some rationalization and justification that, this was a success. This is a great vaccine development platform. Well, when you already know what's coming because you're helping with the bad part of it, what was the group of New York firemen that won Fireman of the Year because they had the highest ratings in the country. They got to the fires the fastest. They put the fires out the fastest. Why? They were the dumbasses setting the fires.
Uh-oh.
Okay? So DARPA is just a big fireman. Okay? They're starting the fires, and then they can come in and say, ooh, look what we did. We helped this. No.
Potentially, but I don't believe that. I still don't believe that that's where it all stemmed from. But I do think it's funny, though. You did bring this up, talk about pandemics and stuff like that. Did you know, this is funny, is that DARPA has been associated with projects that are quote unquote zombie apocalypse themed and that kind of stuff.
Well, I mean,
and basically it's to say that that they have worked on projects that involve real world threats like pandemics and neurological control that kind of sound like zombie scenarios in a way, and they have a bunch of different stuff that kind of goes on about biological outbreaks, civil unrest, and mass casualty events like that. So I think it potentially lumps in with some of that stuff that he's talking about.
When you're
as well.
a think tank and you have to sit around the table and go, okay, what are some things that could happen?
Yeah.
What could the enemy use against us?
Right.
And how do we counteract that? So, as I said, just like Stoney mentioned, 80-something% of their programs fail, 15% or so succeed. Right. So the fact of the matter is that 15% are probably very, very significant.
Right.
So, I mean, I would think the idea on the vaccine deal here. If the traditional method of producing a vaccine took 9 to 10 months to get it from laboratory out to the public, where the public can start to get inoculated from whatever pathogen might be out there. If you can get that down to 30 days, I think that's incredible.
Well,
now,
considering the fact that the vaccine has killed so many people, getting it out maybe wasn't such a good idea. And it's just somebody saying, ooh, look what we did. Okay, the vaccine is killing people. The vaccine is killing more people than it's helping. So was it really a good thing? No. Okay, so I kind of disagree with that because we're just saying, ooh, look at us. Look what we did. When they knew what was going on, what they're thinking about is how to kill the population.
I don't think that's the truth.
I absolutely do. Because how many people...
What would that benefit, them killing the population? What does that benefit?
The military-industrial complex and the ultra-elite want to do that. Who is on the board? Okay, the libtards, the same people that are the professors and the think tank people that are on the board.
But how does that benefit them?
Because there's more food and less carbon emissions, and they know they're going to live and we're going to die.
But again, it sounds like a okay. I gotta stop.
It's kind of like Israelis to 10th man.
I think.
Okay, have you heard of Israelis to 10th man?
No.
They have a group of 10 men. Okay, and they're presented with an idea, and one man has to take the stand of the outrageous, no matter what you think it is. This group came out after the attack in the 70s. Okay, and so the 10th man has to take the stance of the completely outrageous and fight for that, no matter that the other 9 are looking this other way. What if this group is doing the same thing?
No, I mean, I don't have any evidence, any overwhelming evidence to show that they were trying to kill people. I mean, look, we all lived during COVID. There was a lot of fear. And look, this just proves to me all I got to do is shake the reality of under my feet a little bit. And then people will do a lot of things that they never would have dreamed of. I tell people all the time, if COVID was something that had a 50% mortality rate across all age groups,
right,
I guarantee you people would have been locked up in their homes, afraid to go outside. The entire world would have shut down completely. And people say, well, I would never do that. I knew people that were these people that said that, and all of a sudden that happened, and guess what they did? They locked themselves up in their houses.
Of course, because I'm not going to be the one who's going to die for this.
Because of fear. Yeah. Because it's my life, and I don't want to get sick and just die in a gurgling.
And this is what I'm talking about. Is I feel like that's the same sort of stuff I'm talking about. Is I feel like that happened, and we all had to make a decision.
You had to make a decision.
The point
and what I'm saying is that
COVID
I don't think
was 2 social experiments.
Oh, no,
the COVID vaccine was designed in China and let out on purpose as a social experiment. Guess what? So was the vaccine, and we fell for both of them. Okay? We fell for the COVID thing. You had people driving around alone in their cars, not with 1 mask, not with 2 masks, wearing 3 masks alone in their car. And then they said, okay, let's see how we can force the people to take not 1, but 2 vaccines, and how many updates on top of that, and let's see what we can get the people to do. This was a test.
Oh, I agree.
What does DARPA do?
I think it eventually became a test.
Yeah,
I think it started that way.
No, I hear you.
I
hear you, but I don't think that people. I think you give credit to a lot of people.
Okay, whose lab was 15 miles away from Wuhan, China, where the virus started? Who had a laboratory that spent $25 million in Wuhan, China, every year developing?
And probably who was paying him?
No, who was doing it? Bill Gates.
Right.
All right. Who says we need to kill 2/3 of
that
the
was
world's
taken out of
population?
context.
No, it's not.
Okay.
I have the video when he said it.
I know. And I think
and he said we're going to use vaccines.
Right.
and birth control to kill off 2/3 of the population.
I saw that deal. I've seen some deals on Bill Gates regarding that, and I'm not necessarily. I kind of straddle as I said, I kind of walk a little bit with tension on this topic. I do believe that there were people trying to find a cure for something that no one knew anything about, because the reality is you had people dying in hospitals, and of course, there's probably a lot of comorbidities involved with a lot of these people that were, I had COVID. I've had COVID 3 times since it came out. But, I still believe that the intent was to try to find a cure, because that's what everybody was screaming for. At the same time, do I think that maybe could be some nefarious activity there and said, let me do this to see how it affects?
Right.
I do believe there was definitely a lot of that
I think it
going
came about
on
that way.
And I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of noble people that were trying to work very hard to find something. Do I think there was probably some bad actors in that? Oh, yeah, probably so. Yeah, I mean, it's just inevitable that it's going to happen that way. The problem is now all vaccines have become this fear thing now, and I kind of worry. So the next disease that happens, what are we supposed to do? Don't create a vaccine?
No, I think I think what's gonna happen is we're gonna create a vaccine. There's gonna be a large percentage of the population who's not gonna take it.
I don't know. What do?
And then
you
we're
lock
all
yourself
gonna
up in your house and you never leave your house? I knew people that were wearing full gas apparatuses.
Oh, yeah.
Going to grocery stores with that on. I mean, it was crazy.
But here you go. For a disease that had a better mortality rate in a positive sense than the flu.
Oh,
okay. This was a spin. This was a test. The libtard liberal media was paid to push an agenda.
Right.
Facebook was paid by the ultra elite to push an agenda and to test the American public. And then magically these organizations now, hey, we have this vaccine that we can magically produce in numbers that could not have been produced in that time frame.
I think because again,
they already had
because of the pressure. I think a lot of it. I think again,
there's no amount of pressure.
once you spin up the populace and you shut down their whole life and you get that much fear involved. And you're going to have pressure to make no matter how ineffective it was, you got to produce a cure now. I do believe that they did spin it up and they did make it this big thing to probably control the populace. But then once you start hanging on for a few more months,
they didn't cure it. They're killing people. With it.
Right.
So they didn't come out with this magic cure.
But it still shut the people up though. They got their shots, they got their boosters, they got all the stuff they needed.
You got it 3 times, right?
Yeah.
How many shots did you take?
I took the first 2.
The first 2, I got none. I got it 0 times. In a house full of people.
Right.
Taking care of a house full of people with
But you have
COVID.
to say, now, I will say this. I came down with the first bout of COVID before I had any shots.
Right.
So it wasn't because of the shots that I came down with COVID. I've come down with some lesser variants since then. Nothing like it was the first time.
Right.
How I felt.
Because you have to understand how a virus works. A virus is not designed to kill. A virus actually mutates to be less lethal, and less lethal each time you get it. Because if it kills the host,
then
what good does it do?
Right, the virus then dies along with it.
The virus dies with it. So in its own self, the virus is going to do that.
Yeah, it's just that's what I'm saying.
I'll die believing that was a test, a social experiment.
And I'm not saying it's not. I mean, I don't have enough evidence. I've seen evidence. I watched a video on a guy that was very, very direct. I wish I could still find it, but about what people that have gotten shot, what they have in their body, which I have anyway. So it's just whatever.
Well, we had Miss Shanna come on, the mortician, who said, yes, we are finding the strings in people's bodies that had the shot.
Yep.
Something's happening.
Right.
No, I agree.
And all I'm saying is that I think it's all happenstance. I think that again, that's one of the things. Like they expedited a what they thought was a cure all for this.
Yeah,
thing.
it was
now it has its
warp,
side effects.
Warp speed or whatever it was.
Right.
Trump.
I
Just
don't
like-
believe in happenstance, and I agree.
Okay,
I'm not trying to start an argument with you.
Because what I'm saying
but-
is, I feel like the same thing happened with what happened in Wuhan, China. I feel like something happened, a mistake happened, which caused an outbreak of something they probably should be testing with or messing with, and then of course it got spun up into then it became political. That was why I was I hated talking about this, because I was like, we can't talk about like the thing itself. We can't talk about the fact that we're all humans and there's a
Right.
lot of mistakes happening without it being spun up into like a conspiracy
the Wuhan,
theory.
China thing was intentional. It was on purpose, because in China, until they mutated it, they had to get rid of their elderly population. And when you listen to the first reports of the virus before it got to America and started the four mutations, it was killing only elderly people, because they were trying to kill.
And that's probably true. But what I'm saying
so that's
is like
intentional. That's not an accident.
I know, but okay, whatever. Let's please continue.
Well, I mean, we kind of got sidetracked off COVID related stuff, but I mean, DARPA's involved in a lot of other things.
Of course.
I mean, another topic that they're very much involved in is transhumanism.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about transhumanism.
Oh yeah.
I think there is a push with the merging of robots and machine and man together, creating hybrids. We would call cyborgs, and stuff like that. I think they want to get used to soldiers operating and working with robots.
Right.
And I think that's the next. I think that's the next big thing. You're going to see more and more advancements when it comes to that. Cybernetic implants. There are right now very much involved in exoskeletons.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
And matter of fact, I mean, DARPA was very much involved in cybernetic implants, and as far as cybernetic, enhancements, like people that had their arms blown off or their legs.
Well, that's kind of what's going on right now with the Donald Trump, Elon Musk thing, is because people are looking at how many of these contracts is he getting, because that's a lot of what he deals with the cyber implants and things like that. They want to know, is this big argument happening between them two, because maybe people are finding out how many defense contracts he's going to get.
Yeah, they call this biohybrids.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. If
Well,
we're talking about conspiracy theories for that kind of stuff, or I don't say conspiracy theory, but like that whole
Unknown
spat,
theories.
that whole spat that they had online, I think was
I think it was intentional.
I think it was what do you call it? A distraction, a diversion.
Yes, diversion.
I think it was meant to stir up and get people to look at that instead of what's actually happening.
really happening.
Because I don't know what's happening, but like there's
I kind of broke the DARPA impact into a generational thing, and I want to go ahead and do it because of what you're saying right there with the meta-human kind of stuff, so to speak. Boomers lived through the Cold War and the early internet. Gen X witnessed stealth technology, GPS, and digital surveillance rise. The millennials are growing up with DARPA-born internet tech, now see the rise of AI and brain interfaces, and Gen Z will most likely be the first generation to normalize DARPA-linked human-enhanced technology.
Mm-hmm. That sounds about right.
But look at the spread
Oh yeah.
of just the technology there. That is insane. That's a lot just to swallow.
We've talked about this 100 times in the show.
Yeah.
I feel like the speeding up of technology.
Yes.
You know what DARPA reminds me of?
What's
so funny, just how it relates back to video games.
Oh yeah.
The Enclave. And Fallout.
I knew it. That's so true.
I had to throw that in there. I was
Yeah.
like, the more we talk about this, about these exoskeletons, I'm thinking of power armor and all these things that.
Did y'all hear about the DARPA Grand Challenge?
Yes, I read a little bit about that.
This was the autonomous vehicle race that sparked the self-driving car industry from 2004 to 2007 across the U.S. Can you imagine that?
Crazy.
That was back in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to talk about a little bit about the dollar figures. I know you said you had some budgetary figures you said you wanted to talk about.
Hold on, let me.
I'm curious. I saw some numbers, kind of talking, researching this topic, and it's quite
basically
eye-opening.
Yes, basically DARPA gets about $4.5 billion in the fiscal 2025 year. And what they do is these are all estimates, of course. The Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR or STTR, they spend about $300 million. This is seed-staged technology via small businesses. This is where they're funding people to kind of go in the direction they want. In electronics, networking, and IT R&D, they're spending $1.4 billion. This is over, a good bit of their funding for advanced electronics, networking, cyber, and their AI research. Critical technology areas, hypersonics and biotech, they're spending $1.6 billion, which is hypersonics, EW, cyber, space tech, and quantum computing stuff that they're working on.
Right.
Their test and evaluation infrastructure, they're spending almost $500 million on that, and the remaining budget of $1.06 billion is other R&D. Okay, in quotes.
How vague.
Other R&D.
Right.
Program offices, internal support, and emergent tech portfolios.
Wow.
And of course, these are just rough figures that we.
So what do we have? What was the total number of the budget again?
Total number is about $4.5 billion.
$4.5 billion.
Yeah, and they could just kind of take that money and just go hire,
I was curious.
old departments at universities.
Right. Well, that's what.
And believe me, they can and then they can fold that program up when they want to,
but
and
remember,
be out of there.
Our buddy Brandon Iglesias.
Oh yeah.
That was kind of some of the people that were hiring his little company to come out.
Exactly. That's all part of.
That's all part of it.
Part of DARPA's.
I just think it's crazy that basically a quarter of that fund is all just like other stuff.
Other stuff. Yeah.
Well, I mean, think of the
budget.
stuff that Brandon talked about.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the wetware and how all that is in our food and water and how all that, some say that the shots of vaccines, that there's carriers in there. I mean, it's everywhere. I don't know how you get away from it, because whether you get a vaccine or not, you still got to eat, you still got to drink. So unless you're growing your own food, and then you got to wonder about, are they doing weather modification?
What are they? DARPA did some of that too.
What are they dropping out of the clouds? So I mean, I don't know how you get away from it. But
in 1958, the initial ARPA, because it started off as ARPA, right after Sputnik, they put in $520 million. In 63. It was approximately $250 million. In 96, it was $2.27 billion.
Jeez.
In 2005, it was $3.25 billion. In 2021, it was $3.5 billion. In 24, it was $4.122 billion. And in 25, it's about $4.5 billion.
That's wild. That number never goes down.
Yeah, well, actually, it did. It started off at 520, then went to 250, and then in a couple of decades, it went to 2.
I'm talking about once it gets successful.
Yeah, once it gets going, it's on.
Once it gets going.
Well, I'm gonna tell you what they were also. I mean, DARPA was the ones that created Agent Orange.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of.
There's and of course, with 9/11, there was a big surge.
Right. I mean,
that's when it to
obvious.
the $3 billion.
Yeah. And I'm gonna tell you right now, President Trump has mentioned about creating a defensive shield around the United States, its own golden dome.
Yeah.
Sort of kind of model after what Israel uses.
Didn't Ronald Reagan start that? Wasn't it Star
SDI.
Wars? SDI.
Strategic Defense Initiative. Yeah. And I'm gonna tell you what, I remember a speech he gave. It was whether it was it was in front of Congress or just an interview, like the media.
Right.
He gave a press conference, but he mentioned about the threats out there, and he like pointed at the sky.
Really?
Yes. So you kind of wonder what he was hinting at.
Oh, right.
I just think there's, we have to have an organization like this that is finding ways to keep you on top and to possibly anticipate things that we're not even thinking about right now. We just don't. We kind of go about our lives and we just kind of live it, and we're in our own little bubble, and we just kind of do our thing. But I'm glad there's an agency out there that's pushing the limits.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like let's see what we can find and see how hard we can push the science.
I got one for Ian. In 1963, ARPA contracted MIT with a $2.2 million for Project Mac, which is the early AI labs.
Okay.
In 1963.
Right.
Early AI. They already knew.
Oh, yeah.
And
but
that
I think
continued for about $3 million a year into the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And then it started spiking after that.
I think AI has taken on many different forms, but it's until we started hitting large language models and things like that and started like scalping the internet is when things started to get real crazy. But
I'm going to tell you what, a lot of people don't realize a lot of tech that was shown the world was during the Gulf War.
Mm-hmm.
Cheney, while defense secretary, was very much a proponent of using tech to win wars,
right?
To win conflicts, and I think the world was shocked about how fast we completely toppled Saddam Hussein, and they had a pretty substantial army. Yeah. They really did.
Yeah.
I think at one time they were like the 4th or 5th largest.
I think it was also an untested army, though.
Well,
America's a tested army. Whether people say we haven't won a war since World War II, we're still a tested army.
Yeah, but I think I think other countries were shocked.
Yeah.
Of how fast the U.S. military completely just drove into that country and just took it. Believe me, China and Russia were looking at that.
Oh, they were watching.
Oh,
We were talking about fear again.
Oh, yeah.
They were watching.
I don't know if this is a sore subject to bring up, but of course the recent destruction of the military base over in Iran.
Talking about when they tried to shoot the rockets.
Yeah, well, whenever America bombed.
Those
took it all
3
out.
nuke facilities. Yeah.
I mean, that was all.
I think they were expecting Iran to do something.
Well, of course they were, because they were talking about doing it.
I think, be honest with you, the way that whole thing went down, it was like, okay, we'll let you do your thing.
Yeah.
We're going to clear the base out. Nobody's going to get hurt. Let you shoot your missiles.
Right.
Show that you responded back. I just kind of feel like that was kind of weak, considering that literally you just had a country just fly in and just bomb 3 major facilities in your home country, and the only thing you did was pop off a few rockets,
right?
And hit a military base.
I could be wrong, but do you know what some of that? It was. Speaking of stealth technology, it was done out by a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber.
Yeah,
and from what I have been, I could be wrong. The reason why everything went off as good as it did, because it was never detected. It came in there, dropped the bomb, destroyed the whole facility, and was gone. And no one.
They had other planes involved.
Right,
It was brilliant. But you know what? I like what Ian said earlier, because it's watch this hand, so you can't see what this hand is doing. It's now come out that Donald Trump wants to open a golf course in Iran.
Stop it.
Yeah, he's got the first 3 holes.
Yeah. Stop it. I knew that one was coming. I knew that was coming,
So
Stoney.
we were talking about DARPA and the vaccines.
Yeah.
They came out with mRNA vaccines after and said, this is the greatest thing. We've just developed it. But yet DARPA in 2013, years before, was giving Moderna money to come up with the mRNA
Of course.
vaccines.
Right.
Yep.
So
Well, that's what I'm
they
saying.
knew
It's like,
way back then, even though they came out and said, "Ooh, look what we just developed."
Well, this is I think where DARPA is thinking ahead and
Yeah.
going, these viruses seem like something that could possibly be used
Right.
to attack. So how do we overcome that? So this
Right.
kind of goes back to this thinking 25 years ahead, going, okay,
right.
all right, now we need to figure something to combat. It's just
Yeah.
like when we create the atom bomb, now we need to create something that can defeat the atom bomb.
Right.
It's just this constant
I
you know,
think that I think that
jump
if,
over
if,
the
if
hurdle, you know?
I think that whole scenario, if it was handled a little bit differently, we would be singing a different tune right now.
I think it was the political climate.
A lot
that-
of it.
You know what? DARPA did not invent the mRNA vaccine.
right,
That's
yeah,
right. But
yeah.
it made it real
Yes.
Yeah,
for us. So now
Right.
we're left with deciding, is the technology breakthrough
All right.
or a rushed experiment with a human cost?
Right.
And that's what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah,
I
I believe that, yeah.
understand that there are people out there trying to do something, but I also know that there is a lot of people out there
Right.
trying to control and doing some nefarious shit. And I just wonder
Right,
how
right,
all
right.
of this kind of
And
plays into it.
I don't disagree with you. It just gets to a point where it starts to become like sinister sci-fi evil villain of like, we have to control the population by killing all of them, of like that. Like I get where you're coming from, but it just doesn't. If you're gonna do that, like why beat around the bush? Just do it. And I feel like it's kind of one of those things. And it's also, I'm not understanding the bigger picture of like what the benefit of that is. Like, anyways, that's the part where for me it gets a little bit hard for me to swallow that. Where it's like I don't. But I do think it's like I've said 100 times on this podcast and other shows. The truth lies somewhere in the middle, somewhere in that gray zone of like there are crazy extremes on both sides, but like the truth is somewhere in that middle part where it's like I think that a lot of human error was at play. I think a lot of probably bad intentions were at play. I think a lot of good intentions were at play, and like so I think there's like, but I think all of it was mismanaged that like led it to be what it is
I
today.
think when you have human beings
Yeah.
and you put them in positions of power and give them pretty much unlimited resources, you're only guided by your own internal moral compass in
Right.
how you go about doing these
Yes,
things, and
absolutely.
that's where the problem comes
Right.
in.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It does, and you got the way you overcome that, and I think it's kind of baked into the DNA of these agencies,
Right.
Because we give them autonomy because these things got to get done, and
Yeah.
somebody's got to do them. I don't want to take the time to
Right.
worry about this stuff. I'm not smart enough to deal with that. I don't have the those kind of skills.
Yes.
I just kind of want to live my life and the best way I can,
Right.
and hopefully you create things that ultimately make life better.
But see, we still want to live in a time where you can trust your government to handle those things. And from doing this podcast and other stuff, we're finding out that our government's not the one in control.
Right.
Our government is a tool, is a facade, is a whitewashed thing.
As a group of people.
Well,
that's the part for the problem for me is that I have been in workplaces where I work underneath somebody who is important and is the face of something.
Right.
When something goes wrong, they look at me and say, "What's the problem?"
Right.
And I try to describe the problem to them and try to describe how I'm going to try to fix it. They then have to go to a board of people and then
Right.
relay my information that I gave them as best they can to calm everybody else down before
Right.
they start like pulling money from things. And like that has been my reality where it's like that's even on just this small scale. I can only imagine like you got I don't know. You got people that are in power that are like, we got to keep the money going. I got to start talking to these people or whatever. And people are just kind of giving you the stuff to say and you just say it. And then of course now.
it's real. It's real fear. Because look,
Right.
at the end of the day, do we want our enemies that are very hostile to us to have things
Right.
that can reach out and hurt us, and we have no means of counteract? No American wants that at all.
Right.
So unfortunately, it's as I said, it's kind of baked into the DNA of these type of agencies. It's,
Right.
Yeah, it gives rise to to potential abuses, and has abuses happened? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just think that's inevitable. The only way you combat that is through transparency, because Congress is not overseeing any of this stuff.
Right,
They're not.
right.
They don't have a
They're
clue.
supposed to.
They don't have a clue.
They don't have a clue.
I don't. I mean, just look
and
at
the ones that have a clue have been bought and paid for.
Well,
by
that's
some of
well. I
them.
mean, just look how bills are done. They just the lobbyists prep the bills and they bring it to the.
We don't have to talk about this, but I have to say something.
Go ahead.
Did you hear the P. Diddy case?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yes.
You have enough money, you can get away with anything, and it's
Yes.
proof right there. You have enough evidence against you, and you can get away scot-free. That's ridiculous.
Well,
He's not scot-free.
He's not scot-free because he was denied bond.
You're right,
and
you're
he's-
right,
because
but-
of
but-
the prostitution transportation
but
charges.
he has a potential maximum of 10 years, and I would guarantee he's not even going to see half of that.
I agree with that.
And
I
that's,
do agree with
I'm
that.
talking about the minimum for some of the other charges were 15 years.
But you have to think about this too. What was P. Diddy and what was Jerry Epstein?
Oh, I know.
They were CIA assets.
I know.
So they go into it knowing this, knowing they're going to be able to keep their money on the back end, go do a little time, and come out and do better the next time.
Right. And that's all I'm saying.
I agree with you on
it's
that.
crazy.
I agree with you
That's
on
a
that
lot
one.
of that's. I mean, you had so much condemning evidence.
Yes.
And you're just out of it.
Just the baby lotion alone.
You know, it kind of reminds me of the movie Lord of War. with Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
But that's based off of a true story.
It is. That's Victor Bout.
Yes.
That was
Crazy.
so that's what I'm saying. If
There's
these,
going to be a phone call at that phone in a
Right.
few minutes, and you're going to let me go.
yeah, I mean, to me, it's just it's how the world works, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, there are people in power that need
Oh yeah.
some of these kind of undesirable people to do this, because then that gives me leverage.
And I agree. Yeah.
That gives me leverage. So don't tell me that the CIA hasn't used some of this information
Yeah.
to basically, when we're dealing with some of these countries that maybe some of their leaders maybe have kind of dipped their foot in that pond, so to speak.
Right.
Yep.
They're like, you know what? Maybe on that trade deal or allow this. Maybe you probably don't want your people to know we know this.
Right.
Oh, okay. We'll do what you want to do.
Yeah.
See how that works. But that can also work the other way too.
Well, you let an arms dealer go for a
A basketball player.
basketball
Get
player.
out.
That was a joke.
You're going to tell me that wasn't something other than what we think it
Suspicious.
was?
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah.
Who's
that's
back working
whatever.
now?
That's politics.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
all that is
Politics.
politics.
Another interesting project I read about with DARPA, which I think would be absolutely fabulous if they can somehow make that happen, is getting the human body to regenerate.
Oh yeah. That's
Did y'all
crazy.
see
That's
that?
sci-fi stuff.
Because
right
I mean that. Well, believe it or not, we do regenerate.
there. Right.
At some point, our body regenerates, and it just comes to a point where it stops.
Yeah.
Well, when we were closer to God, we regenerated for 900 years.
know.
The further away we've gotten away from God, now we about,
Right.
64 years, 75 years.
So
Yeah, it's so that was there is some really incredible work that these this organization indirectly is they're doing. Of
I
course,
swear.
a lot of it is all through initially when DARPA was created, its mission in Congress, and it said, was to develop the tremendous weapon systems of the future. So
Right.
it was strictly couched in military
Yes.
terms. It had nothing to do with the civilian market
Right.
or any of that.
Yep.
All these things are byproducts that have come
Yes.
out of it, but its main focus is to make us the number one military power on Earth. And that means it will never be surprised by any country.
yeah.
So Good or bad?
Hopefully 4.5 billion is enough to do that.
Good or bad? I don't know.
You don't think that's all they're getting?
No,
do you?
no,
Okay,
no.
I think they are. I hate to say it, and I don't like to put it that way, but I just think they're a necessary evil.
Yeah. Well, for anybody out there who wants to share their opinion on it, I'm really curious to see if we get some people riled up for this one.
Yeah, don't forget our email is getoffendedtogether@gmail.com.
Correct. We also have comment sections on Spotify and YouTube and platforms like that. If you want to try and subscribe to us, leave us a like, comment and all that kind of stuff. Also the website.
Yes, retrospectpodcast.com.
I think I got it wrong last week, but I think I corrected myself.
That's all right.
But anyways, until next week, thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone, and God bless.
DARPA was born out of fear. The fear that someone else might win the future first. And ever since, it's been racing ahead of the rest of us, funding the kind of ideas that change the world or shake it to its core. From the internet and stealth aircraft to brain-machine interfaces and mRNA vaccines, it's clear that DARPA's hand is everywhere, even in the places we never expected. But here's the question we're going to leave you with. When a government agency succeeds by its own standards, speed, scale, innovation, does that automatically mean that it succeeded for the people? Or is there a growing gap between technology triumphs and public trust? As always, we invite you to think critically, question boldly, and dig deeper, because sometimes what isn't declassified speaks the loudest. Thanks for listening. See you next time. You're the absolute best. Peace.